I was very young when my mother took me to the farm. She put me on the ground and started working. All of a sudden, something exploded. My mom ran to me. I was badly wounded. She rushed me to different hospitals. My hand started healing, but eventually, my mom died. Since then, I've been through a lot of suffering. There's been nobody to help me.
We are 4 in number. We are going inside the bush for toilet. So one of us saw it in the bush and he picked it. He never know that in a bomb. So he picked it and play. The thing explode. And the 3 of them died. Only me survived. So since that time, the thing still worrying me.
There has been many explosions from the unexploded, what would I call it, warfare, or things they use for the war, including bombs. And it has affected the usage of our entire compound. The farms are unsafe for the students. Many a time they go there, they discover things that are threatening to human existence here.
Putting faces to the sad incident of the Biafra War, civil war in Nigeria 47 years ago, and 47 years after, victims, families and communities affected by the 30-month Nigerian civil war will now get a compensation package, as the federal government has agreed to pay 88 billion naira to them following an out-of-court settlement application.
Now, the court ordered the parties to abide by the terms of the settlement, which, part of which stipulates that the federal government pay without delay compensation in the sum of 50 billion naira to the victims, their families and communities in 11 affected states in the southeast, south-south and parts of the north-central.
Well, 38 billion naira would be dedicated to the evacuation of abandoned bombs and other lethal weapons, as well as the construction of schools, courts, churches and mosques, among other social amenities in the affected areas.
Yes, indeed.
Well, we have joining us in the studio at this time, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Femi Falana, to talk to us about this commendable move by the present administration. Good morning to you and thank you for joining us on the show. Yes, the federal government chose to settle out of court. I mean, I understand we're part of the representatives of the government, am I right?
Yes.
Yes, so we know how to lay our questions. Chose to settle out of court. What kind of advice did you give to the government to take that step, which many have been commending?
Well, I actually was briefed by the Jonathan administration through the then Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice, Mr. Mohammed Adoke, SAN, to defend the federal government. It was a rather strange brief. Well, I don't get briefs from that area, you know.
You're usually on the other side.
On the other side. But as Mr. Adoke made clear to me, Femi, this is a human rights matter, and the government has been sued in the ECOWAS court. We would like to have your advice on the matter. Of course, I took the processes, studied them, and advised the government, you know, to have this matter resolved amicably, that you couldn't go to court and say, this was 2012, and tell the whole world that we are so negligent or irresponsible to allow people to live with bombs and landmines after 40 years of the Civil War. And in fairness to Mr. Adoke, he said, well, Femi, if that is your opinion, I think it's a good idea, you know, set about, you know, setting the engine in motion for an amicable resolution. And I contacted the claimant, the plaintiffs, you know, and we began, you know, series of negotiations. But when the process, when President Jonathan was defeated in the 2015 election, and as soon as the Buhari administration came on board, I made contacts with the government at the highest quarters. You know, we had meetings with the Attorney General and Minister of Justice, Mr. Abubakar Malami, SAN. the Minister of Defense, as well as the Director General of the State Security Service. And I was able to convince them, you know, that this matter had to be resolved amicably.
But has it been resolved amicably?
Oh, for sure.
With this 88 billion naira for victims, and of course part of it too will go to contractors who are supposed to carry out the demining process. Yeah. But some people would say that the Nigeria-Biafra war really has not ended, and this 88 billion naira compensation, in quote, is more symbolic than really an attempt to assuage and actually, you know, ease the pain of those victims.
No, to be honest with you, for me, and I made this point abundantly clear to both the Jonathan administration and the Buhari administration, that for me, this constitutes the ugliest chapter in the Civil War narrative. That people are still living with bombs, and it has crippled people, render many people vulnerable, physically assaulted, and they're living with bombs. School children. And your station was very wonderful. I mean, I got moved when I saw the film, I mean, shown by your station. Yes. And I think the lady that recorded the program, that went to the East to record the program, Kelechi, you know. Yes. Yeah, even won an award, you know. So for me, it was an award-winning, you know, assignment carried out by your station. And I was personally moved. And I got the tape and I sent it to government, you know, and asked government to close this ugly chapter. Now,
the people demanded for 100 billion naira, but the money
aside... No, they actually demanded for 50 billion naira compensation. And I'm talking about the victims.
Oh, the victims.
Now, for the removal of the landmines and bombs abandoned after 47 years, you know, the contractor, you know, is going to be mobilized with a sum of 38 billion. But I also must make the point very clear. There is the need to recall the fact that actually the Jonathan administration, this contract was awarded, by the way, in 2007. But it was not funded. It was the Jonathan administration that made a part payment of 1.5 billion naira for the first phase of the whole assignment, you know. So we now want to see to, I mean, put this matter behind us once and for all.
Okay, yeah, aside this amount now, because that was the figure we heard, that it was down to 88 billion naira anyway, but aside the figures, what about the, because she just asked a question, a very sensitive question, that somehow it seems that people from that region are still persecuted in a way as perceived by so many people in the country, because after,
in other words, they still feel that the war is still,
you see, you are going to the
especially when
I don't want to go into politics. I want to bring out the
politics of the civil war.
I want to bring out a point here.
I'm dealing with the the judgment of the court.
Exactly. Apart from the apart from that, now that people should be compensated. What about putting them through a process of healing? Should it just be that you pay them off and that's just it?
You see, for the communities, I mean, and I'm not care, and I don't get involved in the campaign of the elite about marginalization. The masses of our people are marginalized all over the country. So when people talk about, people in the East have been marginalized and so on and so forth, the masses in the North have been marginalized, in the West, in the South, and all over the country. The elite play up this campaign to get contracts, you know. They will tell you, we want to fix the roads in the West or the East. The elite gets the contract, and the contract is abandoned. You go to the East, Southeast today, you'll be ashamed at the level of collapse of roads. Whose contracts were awarded to, you know, members of the elite from that part of the country, just like in the West or in the North.
Okay, so now this compensation.
So if you are talking of
healing.
If you are talking of healing, a process of healing, that is part of what the money will be spent on. We're going to rebuild schools that have collapsed, have, you know, destroyed, churches and worshiping centers, right? And in the process of rebuilding the schools, we're also going to get the children whose education has been truncated, back to school. Those whose houses have been destroyed will be compensated in terms of having new structures. This is not money that should just be distributed.
Okay, so now about 685 persons have been classified as survivors, while 493 of them were classified as victims of landmines and or other dangerous
bombs,
military weapons. Is this good enough? Who really are the true victims of this civil war? One would have imagined that the figures would be far more than these numbers that we have, barely 1,200.
Yeah, now we're dealing with the affected people in those communities in about 11 states. Okay. The elite gets the contract and the contract is abandoned. You go to the east, southeast today, you'll be ashamed at the level of collapse of roads whose contracts were awarded to, you know, members of the elite from that part of the country, just like in the west or in the north.
Okay, so now this compensation.
So if you are talking of
healing.
If you are talking of healing, a process of healing, that is part of what the money will be spent on. We're going to rebuild schools that have collapsed, have, you know, destroyed, churches and worshiping centers, right? And in the process of rebuilding the schools, we're also going to get the children whose education has been truncated back to school. Those whose houses have been destroyed will be compensated in terms of having new structures. This is not money that should just be distributed.
Okay, so now about 685 persons have been classified as survivors, while 493 of them were classified as victims of landmines and or other dangerous
bombs,
military weapons. Is this good enough? Who really are the true victims of this civil war? One would have imagined that the figures would be far more than these numbers that we have, barely 1,200.
Yeah, now we're dealing with the affected people in those communities in about 11 states. Okay. From the south, east, south, up to the north central, Benue state and the rest of them. Now, people have come out to say, we are the victim, direct victims of these abandoned landmines and bombs. We've lost our schools, we've lost our homes, we've lost even our limbs. And people have died. And they have come forward to say, we want to be compensated. If there are other victims, unfortunately, they didn't come. And the court does not, it's not like Father Christmas that will simply just award, you know, monumental sum to people who have not come forward to make a claim. But for me, I think the judgment is historic. I mean, it's not just the value. What we should now be worried, I mean, what should now engage our attention is how the judgment sum will be paid as soon as possible, so that the contractors can be mobilized to remove these dangerous weapons that have been abandoned by the government, and as well as setting up a committee that will ensure that the fund goes to the actual victims.
Okay, apart from part of the consent judgment is that the federal government will establish a national mines action center in Owerri. Please tell us about that and the purpose that will serve for the victims.
Well, number one, when you have a center like that, it's like a monument. For instance, these materials that are going to be removed are simply not going to be burned or, you know, thrown to the Atlantic Ocean. You know, quite a number of them will be stored in the center, so that people can know in future, and generations yet unborn should know what our people went through. Because I must tell you, many of the young people who are demanding for the state of Biafra never learned about what people went through during the Civil War in any school.
You took it right out of my mouth.
History is never taught in our school.
You've just pointed out the fact that there is a need for young people to
know what happened. Draw sufficient lessons.
Do you think that is possibly at the root of these agitations from the Southeast, for example? They don't seem to understand that, look, this is a sorry past that we went through before, and the cost is too high.
No, history is not taught in our schools. In fact, it was abolished completely at a state. And so the young people just simply are disenchanted with the system. And they now believe, oh, the best thing is to embrace civil war. I mean, when we're struggling for the validation of the June 12 mandate, there were young people here under the auspices of the Odua People's Congress that started saying, oh, to thy tent, oh Israel. We have to tell them, no. We are talking of justice within the territory of Nigeria. Right? So we must get history taught in our school, made a compulsory subject in all our schools. And I'm not talking of colonial history, of Mugopa discovered River Niger. I'm talking of those who were in River Niger. You have to talk about those who were in River Niger when the colonial intruders and slave traders came to this country. And you'll be surprised. I talk to you now. I just read it 2 weeks ago. That we are still paying pension to colonial officials. In fact, about 6 million in this Maynard gave.
Yes.
6 million pounds has just been traced to an account in the United Kingdom by EFCC, meant for payment of pension to colonial officials. What a criminal act. When Nigerian officials are not paid pension, those who never served Nigeria, but who served the British government, when they came to take over our resources, human and natural, you are compensating them when Nigerians are not paying pension. So we have to teach our history on the Civil War.
Is that the same reason why students of University of Lagos rejected totally that the school should be renamed after MKO Abiola?
No.
The same reason that the history is not taught, and you would imagine that, okay, something that happened in 1993 is lost on the younger generation.
If you ask some of your young journalists here, what was the June 12 about? They won't tell you. They won't be able to tell you. Or Civil War, or whatever. You know, so we must now go back. I mean, sometimes I get disturbed. Oh, when members of the elite try to play up the differences between Awo and Zik, Igbos and Yorubas and Hausa and the rest of nonsense. You know? But now nobody will tell you that Adekunle Fajuyi, Colonel Adekunle Fajuyi, hosted General Aguiyi-Ironsi in Ibadan. And when Madrasu seized the president or the head of state there, and we're going to kill him, he said, no, you can't go away with my guest. No, it's not possible. So I must go with you. I must be killed along with him.
So at the heart of
nobody is told that in our history.
So at the heart of it, at the end of the day, would you say that it is the political nature of it all that is causing this problem, that somehow the past, some portion of the past wants to be buried so that it doesn't...
No, the ruling class is a deliberate ploy by the ruling class to keep our people ignorant and get them and play up divided et impera tactics, or divide and rule. Because people are never told, oh, the Yoruba man laid down his life. And that during the Civil War, whereas people talk of abandoned properties in Rivers State, no property was abandoned in Lagos. That people were collecting rent. And after the Civil War, money was paid to people whose properties, who left home. Who left for their homes. So we must teach these aspects of our history. Positive aspect, areas where our people, for instance, the British government, out of sheer hypocrisy, join us to condemn the proscription of IPOB by the Buhari administration. I simply laughed. And I wish somebody was going to remind Lai Mohammed, the Minister of Information, that in 1949, incidentally, November 1949, I think November 18, the British colonial police killed 21 coal miners in Enugu for demonstrating in 1949. And a year before then, the British government proscribed the most radical youth organization against colonialism in Nigeria, the Zikis movement.
The Nigerian youth.
So is it?
So you will have expected the government to say, hey, British government, mind your business. We learned this from you.
But some they are still towing the path of the colonial masters.
No, the colonial, of course. Because like Professor Claudakis said, when the British colonial regime left in 1960, the ruling class, the indigenous ruling class, left the instrumentality of exploitation and oppression intact.
Was Abiola right when he talked about reparation? Because you mentioned...
You for sure.
You mentioned...
no, for sure. Nobody has been able to challenge the demand for reparation. And that was one of the, in fact, the principal reason why the West colluded with the Babangida junta that Abiola would not be president of Nigeria. Because it was going to be embarrassing for a Nigerian president to go to the United Nations, Commonwealth, another fora, to demand for reparation for 500 years of slave trade and 100 years of colonial rule. And this will interest you. We're just, I'm just working with some colleagues now, right? We're going to file an action in the United Kingdom very soon for compensation to the families of the Enugu coal miners who were killed by the British colonial regime. I'm also working with some colleagues in Ghana because the British also killed some people in Ghana. You know why we're doing that? The the victims of the Mau operation in Kenya sued the British government about 4 years ago.
And they did get.
And the British government was so ashamed. We can't go to court to challenge it. It was settled out of court. About 19.4 million pounds was paid to the victim. We also want to do that here.
All right, so it's quite so it makes this out of court settlement quite symbolic, really.
Oh, sure, for sure.
So what gains should be made out of this? What should the government build on with this kind of agreement now to put in place an all-inclusive kind of governance?
I think just like the Buhari administration has just paid pension to former Biafra police personnel, this judgment should also be paid as soon as possible. And some instrumentality should be put in place to ensure the faithful implementation of the judgment.
In fact, well, I think it's made provision for in the agreements that for transparency and accountability, federal government will set up special purpose vehicle to comprise necessary stakeholders in terms of settlement. But who are the stakeholders? Will the government
the government is going to sit down with the parties. The parties will nominate their accredited representative. The government will also do the same. And otherwise, before you know it, there will be a lot of problems.
Well, in responding to this gesture from the federal government, which on the one hand, some say, yes, this symbolic gesture is commendable. On the other hand, some are saying, look, it's not far-reaching enough. Groups like IPAC, for example, or Hanez Ndibo too, has come out to say, look, it is not enough to just throw out these tokens. The issue of marginalization is a reality. No, you already addressed that. You addressed that. Of course, you don't want to talk about the politics of it. But look, that there is a need to tackle the problem even beyond this compensation for the...
I fully agree with you. But what I'm saying...
And some are saying, too, that, look, you need to compensate soldiers who also are victims of the Biafra war and all of that.
I fully agree with the sentiments. But the point I'm making, I beg you, is that we should not mix this judgment
with politics,
with the politics of marginalization. What should concern Waneze and other groups is to support the demand for the enforcement of the judgment, the payment of the judgment debt. And once that is done, we move on from there. But the point I'm making today, soldiers are dying in the northeast region. I've just made a case for, before a government presidential panel on human rights by the military, over 200 people who were bombed according to the military authorities, accidentally, in Ran. I mean, I'm talking of the IDP camp. So we have casualties.
Yes.
We have victims of socioeconomic injustice in our country on a daily basis. Before the Civil War, during the Civil War, and after the Civil War. All we do in the human rights community is to ensure that we put a machinery in place to compensate people who are victimized by the system, so that we do not single out
any particular
victims.
But
of
do
the
you
Civil
foresee
War.
that there is a possibility of more class actions coming up now from victims of that
Maybe from
Civil
other parts
War?
of-
Are you advising the government?
No, it's
to
a
take
regular phenomenon.
Okay.
For the military invasion of OD in Biafra State, the Federal High Court awarded 37 billion naira against the federal government. I think 50% of that was paid, we have settlement. In the case of Zakibiam, the Federal High Court awarded 41 billion naira. In the case of Baramotu, in Delta State, again when the military invaded the community, the Federal High Court awarded 99 billion.
But the OD are still crying?
Well, again, that is why a committee is necessary now. Because the government did not put any machinery in place. Those who collected the money on behalf of the community engaged in the diversion of the money. Right now, the community has just filed a petition before the FCC to recover the money and then share, equitably.
Human rights lawyer, Mr. Femi Falano, thank you so much for joining us on TVC Breakfast and enlightening us and taking us down the lane of history. Of course, like you said, history needs to be taught so that the next generation can borrow a leaf from our past. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you.